Good afternoon, everyone. We'd just like to welcome you to the final WebEx in the Buurtzorg WebEx series. So this is the role of the team coach. If you've not done so already, please dial in on your phone using the numbers on the screen and enter the passcode followed by the hash key to join the meeting. Once you've joined, if you select Start Your Video Camera, so that we can all see you, and enter your unique code that's shown on the screen. This is going to be different for everybody, but it will link your voice to your camera picture and also your name on the screen. If you've already joined the meeting, you can find your unique identification number if you go on to the Meeting Info tab just at the top of your screen, and you'll be able to see your unique attendee number on the screen there. Just to make everyone aware, the session is being recorded today, and we'll make this available on the Knowledge Hub website at the end of the session. If you want to receive the links to this recording or previous recordings, then please email the Living Well and Communities team at the email address on the screen. If we could please ask everyone to mute their phone lines during the presentation and then unmute during any discussion points, that will just make the conversation flow. And please feel free to ask any questions during the presentation using the chat box. So if you look at the top of your screen on the right-hand side, there's a chat function there. And if you just make sure that you've selected everyone when you're sending the message, then we'll all see what you're asking. I'll just hand over to Alex.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Gemma, and thank you very much also to Paul Janssen and Tanya Eber, both senior consultants from Buurtzorg, Britain and Ireland. Thank you very much both for rounding off this, as Gemma said, the sixth in a series of WebExes that you've kindly produced for us here at Healthcare Improvement Scotland as part of the Neighbourhood Care Programme. Now, Paul is a Chief Operating Officer for Buurtzorg, Britain and Ireland, and Tanya has a history in Buurtzorg coaching as well, and that's really what we're specifically here to speak about or learn about, is what is the actual role of a team coach within Buurtzorg. What attributes does a person have to have personally really to be a coach, but also, just as importantly, what does a coach need to be taught or needs to learn, and probably even more importantly, what do we as people, as coaches, but also as team members within that team with a coach, and also as people in an organisation, what do we need to unlearn in order to make this role as effective as possible? And that's specifically something that I would like to specifically learn from the two of you. So thank you once again, and you don't want to hear from me, you want to hear from Paul and Tanya. So I shall pass over the ball to you, Paul.
Thank you.
And you control of the webinar.
Yes, lovely. Thank you very much, Alex. Welcome this afternoon. I'll be quizzing my colleague Tanya on all the intricacies of Buurtzorg coaching, and hopefully I will ask most of the questions that you had in mind, but of course, as explained, there's plenty of opportunity for you all to add your own questions at the end. So without much ado, let me start. Let's see if I can get the next slide up. Yes. So Tanya, as a first slide, you put up the Buurtzorg onion model, which we've also covered in probably every single one of our previous sessions of this webinar series. Why did you find it important to start here?
Essentially, Paul, the onion model is the organisational design model for Buurtzorg, both for the delivery of care, but also for the kind of the organisational support around that. So it's really fundamental, and I think many organisations now increasingly are familiar with kind of the principle of putting the patient at the centre and being person-centred and patient-centred, with the principle, and particularly in Buurtzorg, to develop their autonomy and independence. But I think what's so striking about the difference in the Buurtzorg model is that where we're talking about kind of developing patient-centred care, here the model not only allows for the development of the independence and autonomy of that patient and of the people we're looking after, but also for the nursing team as well by being a self-managing team. So the model is really all about empowerment and autonomy and independence, and because of that is a very powerful and congruent kind of organizational design model. And I guess the role of the coach then in that supporting a self-managing team, I suppose on the picture here would fit somewhere between kind of circle 3 and circle 4. We could probably just imagine a nice little pink halo there, where really the role of the coach is to provide support, perhaps with other roles, to that team. And I think that's particularly important because in many hierarchical organizations, as I said, there is perhaps a move towards patient-centered or person-centered care. But I think what's different here is the respect and regard that the nurses demonstrate toward their clients is then replicated within the organization, so that we're really developing a very kind of people-positive way of delivering care. And organizationally, we're really role modeling, working together with people as opposed to kind of to people or on people. And I think that's important in terms of then having a team that's really effective.
Okay, thank you. That's really helpful. So let's then delve into what I'm sure everybody has really on their minds. How does it really work? And let's just focus on the Netherlands first before we start looking at our experience here in the UK.
Yeah. So as I've just alluded to, I suppose, you know, the role of the coach is to support the teams, the frontline staff teams, whether that's nurses. In Holland it is nurses, to be self-managing, to be effective as a self-managing team, and to deliver the care that's needed for their clients. The role of the coach is also then to make sure that the team delivers the performance that is agreed with the organization. In Holland, perhaps it's not quite as explicit as it might be in the UK, and we'll come back to that a little bit later, but they certainly have an understanding about what's expected of them in terms of their productivity and performance. So the role of the coach really is there to support the teams, to be effective, to be well-functioning, and to deliver the work that they're there to do. I mean, in a nutshell, that's the role of the coach. And I guess what's important, and it often comes up, is like, well, isn't that the same as being a manager with a coaching style? Well, it's not. I think there are lots of really great managers who use coaching style conversations with their staff. But I guess what's really different in the role of the coach in Buurtzorg teams is that the locus of control and the locus of responsibility still sits very, very firmly with the teams. So I think it's a different mindset and perhaps a slightly different skill set in terms of really being a coach towards the teams. And the way that is done is, as a coach in the Netherlands, the coaches will work with the teams, but keeping the ownership of any issues with the teams. So they don't take on the role of the expert, they don't take on the role of, I have the answer for you, but really work in partnership with the team and with team members to help them find their own solutions. And that means being mindful and respectful of the fact that teams may well be different and may come up with solutions that the coach may not think is necessarily the best idea, but it's about the team really coming up with their own, solutions bespoke to their own situations. So in Holland, the teams have to work with a coach, so there are about 950 teams now in Buurtzorg territory in Holland, and each coach will work with approximately anywhere up to about 40 teams. And I guess at any one time, out of that 40 teams, that might sound like an inordinate number of teams and people to be kind of involved with, but I guess bubbling that might need a little bit more support, a little bit more input. And I guess we need to recognize that even when there's a kind of a mature team and it's working well and the team dynamics are settled, anything can change. Someone can go on long-term sick leave, someone can go on maternity leave, someone new might join the team. So the teams are live, and because they're live, obviously things can change and dynamics can change at any time. What else can I tell you about the role of Buurtzorg coach in Holland? I guess you know, in Holland, very much the calling of the coach and inviting the coach in for support is not seen as a failure on behalf of the team. The teams will invite the coaches in when they feel they've come up against an issue or a problem that they want to discuss with the coach. But having said that, the coaches can also invite themselves in, either to keep that relationship going. There may be a team, they say, oh, you know, I haven't really heard anything from them for several months, 4 or 5 months. I'm going to go and check in and drop them an email and say, hey, I'd like to come and have a cup of tea with you, or in Holland it might be a cup of coffee. But equally, if they notice anything that they're concerned about, then they might contact that team and call themselves in. I guess one of the differences in Holland, and we're going to come on to a bit more of what we've been learning in the UK about the role of the coach, but I guess in Holland one of the things they would also deal with is sick leave and return to work, so some more of those kind of HR-y type issues, which we haven't necessarily taken on board perhaps in the same way in the English interpretation of the role of the coach. And I guess, you know, thinking about the role of the coach, in Holland, they've created now a coach network, so the coaches also support each other and are able to talk about the sorts of issues that are coming up in their teams and regularly get together so that they can kind of notice what's happening and how things have changed. And I think certainly I was in Holland just a few weeks ago talking about the role of the coach and how that's being used. And I think one of the things they will say is that the role of the coach in Holland has really changed over the past 10 years and developed. And of course, everybody is continuously learning about what makes for a good coach and good coaching. Have I lost my quizzer?
Hello, Tanya. Yeah, sorry, I needed to unmute myself, which might make a big difference. Apologies for that. So let me repeat my question. So how does the coach actually work with the team? What kind of tools does the coach bring that will help team get unstuck and get refocused, perhaps?
Yeah, so I mean, I think I've said a little bit about the locus of control, and I think that's a very kind of fundamental question, really, when you're working with a team. For anybody who's got a background in coaching, I guess most people in the UK, certainly if they do any coaching qualifications, it's much more about one-on-one coaching. And here you're coaching a team of people. The team is the client, really. So we've talked a little bit about helping the team to find solutions, and I guess that really is the role of the coach. There may be that, you know, you're asked to go to you might be asked to come to a team meeting because, you might go just because you decide to go, or the team indeed might call you in, and actually you're sitting there and you're thinking, perhaps this team meeting isn't as effective as it might be, and you might share that observation and with the team and have a conversation, and on the back of that about, you know, how their team meetings are going. In Holland, they use what's called a solution delivered methodology of interaction, which is a particularly solution-focused approach both to team meetings and communication. And so you might support the team in really refining their use of that. It could be that you're asked into, I don't know, there might be a team member who's got a specific issue, but perhaps doesn't really know how to have the conversation, or indeed the team might not know how to find the solution. So it's by asking questions, it's by helping them to think about alternatives, to think about what's possible. And ultimately, one of the main questions is, you know, what do you want? So I was in a team the other day, and somebody was saying they didn't really like how the rota was being done, and of course, saying I don't really like the rota as being done is more problem focused than solution focused. But as soon as Lynn then turned around to her and said, okay, so what would you like and what do you want? Then she was able to think about, well, actually the thing I'm not happy about is the fact that I only get my rota in the evening and then I can't make childcare arrangements quickly enough. So I really need that to change and I need it at least a week in advance. And then the team were able to have a conversation about, well, okay, how can we make that possible? Are we all happy with that? Is there a consensus around that decision? So really as a team coach, you're consistently reinforcing good decision-making, good team meetings, you know, clear and honest communication so that the team is functioning as well as it possibly can be. It's really helpful for the coach to agree with the team how they want to work with the coach. I think going back to my point that all teams are different, there's not the same perhaps drive to try and encourage a consistency across teams in the same way as there might be in the UK. I think there's an acceptance that, you know, different groups of people come to decide how they want to work together in different ways. Perhaps they're more relaxed, perhaps they're more strict. You know, some teams might start their team meeting 10 minutes late, but if that's okay with the team, then that should be okay with the coach too. So I think the skills for the coach really, probably as in any good coaching, is really about listening, it's about asking, it's about being able to both support but also to challenge, to help the team to reflect and learn. I mean, I often say to my teams that really they should be developing some coaching skills themselves so that, in effect, the coach is kind of put out of a job, that they become their own team coach and internally are able to recognise when perhaps they're not having such good conversations or that a conversation needs to be had. But obviously that takes time. So part of the journey of the coach with the team is actually enabling them to become self-managing and to take them from, you know, a new team to a more established team that is functioning well. And I guess the only other thing to add to that, having said that the team is very much the client, it may be that a person in the team wants to speak to the coach about an issue or wants to work out that there's something they're uncomfortable about, that they want to have a conversation with the rest of the team, and they just want a bit of space and support to work out what they're going to say or how they're going to say it. And that would be very much the role of the coach as well. So it could be that you would have a one-on-one conversation, but remembering also that ultimately your client is the team and kind of team functioning.
Okay, thank you, Tanya. The one thing that we know of the Dutch coaches and how they are selected in the Netherlands is that they all have a clinical background. They've all been district nurses, haven't they, themselves? Is that why is that? Is that important? Do they deal with a lot of clinical queries from the teams, or what's the reason behind it?
So I think part of the reason is just have an understanding again about the milieu that the staff are working in. I think one of the things we're seeing in the UK that obviously Buurtzorg is being tried and pioneered in different settings. So sometimes it might be a nursing team, but we've also had care teams. We've also got perhaps more multidisciplinary teams with OTs and physios as part of the team. I think it helps to certainly have an understanding of health and social care and some of the issues that frontline staffing are coming up against. But my sense is that the coach is not really there to give clinical guidance. If anything, the coach is there to support the team in their team functioning. And I think that maybe points to another difference with a self-managing team. You know, part of the work of a self-managing team is the health and well-being of the team. That would be traditionally the role of the manager, but in a self-managing team, that has to be really taken on by the team. So they have their team tasks, they create their own agendas. They're really in charge of their own destiny in that way. So that the coach is there to help them on that part of the work. And if they need any clinical support, then certainly in Holland, they've got other teams they can go to. They've got other experts in particular areas of clinical care they can turn to. So I think the jury is out a bit on that one, Paul, here, but I would say perhaps an understanding of health and social care setting is important. Not sure yet whether they have to be clinical.
Right, okay. That's very helpful. Well, you've already referred to it. Let's now delve into our experience here in the UK, which obviously has a diversity of initiatives, tests and learns, or pilots, as we sometimes refer to them as. And you're a coach yourself, of course. So what's been your experience in that field? How is it different?
Yeah, so I think there's a few differences. I think one of the differences is that obviously over here, the whole notion of coach, indeed the whole notion of Buurtzorg and having self-managing teams is quite novel. So the coach really needs to understand what's the organizational objectives for those teams. And I referred to it perhaps earlier on in the conversation about that framework. And the framework really is a bit like, yeah, I don't really want to, well, it's a bit like a contract, if you like, but kind of in inverted commas. So it's an understanding, it's a series of expectations that the organisation will have of the team and of the delivery of care, but equally that the teams may come to expect of the organisation. And the coach role really is to support the team in delivering that framework. So, for example, it might say in the framework that the team needs to provide 24/7 cover. And actually one of the teams might then kind of say, well, it doesn't really work for us to be providing 24/7 cover because we've got, you know, we're a small team, we don't really have the personnel to do it, there are big distances to travel, etc. And may then start rotoring, perhaps not to cover 24/7. Well, that would be a breach of the framework, and then obviously that would need to have a conversation back with the organisation about those organisational objectives and what's in the framework. But the coach is really there to uphold that framework and support the team to deliver that. So I think that's an important part, and is the same as in Holland, but perhaps the difference is that in Holland that framework is slightly less explicit because they're already working in an organisation where everybody's working the Buurtzorg way, so they're not working counterculturally, and I think that's different for a lot of our pioneer teams here. I guess the other thing is that in the UK context, you know, we're setting up self-managing teams, often in organisations where they might be the only one team or two teams or three teams. So they need more support at the beginning. And I think, indeed, in Holland they would say the same, that, you know, at the beginning the coaches really need to be visiting those teams maybe once, twice, maybe more during the week, and really giving them some of those tools, the solution-driven methodology of interaction, working with them around their team tasks, discussing the framework, discussing the onion model. So they've really got some of those kind of fundamental frameworks, if you like, or tools very much in their system. And yeah, that they've got the information that they need to hand. I guess one of the things we've found that's been really important is that the teams also have their performance indicators, if you like, available to them. Then obviously some of the self-managing teams have started and the IT is not quite in place yet, and that's taken a little while. But really for the teams to be self-managing, they need that information to hand in an immediate way so that they can take responsibility for it. It's very different for them to be able to click on a screen and be able to see what they're doing and how many hours they're working than someone else coming in with a printed version, because that's not them owning it anymore. So yeah, I think we've spoken a little bit about the shift perhaps from teams really taking on board that part of their responsibility, indeed part of their work, is around looking after the team health and well-being, that they need to be mindful about how are our team meetings going? Are we meeting often enough? Are we having the conversations that we need to have? So really thinking about their teamliness as well as their delivery of care. What else can I tell you about differences in the UK context? I think it really helps for the coach here to be clear about their place. So we talked about the coach kind of sitting in that onion level 3 to 4, wrapping around the teams. But I guess they are kind of interspersed between the team and the organisation. And I think it really helps for them to be clear from an organisational point of view about their role of coach and about lines of communication and what the organisation is expecting of the coach perhaps in terms of performance. It would be a common, I think, tension for organisations to feel that if the teams are successful, or perhaps if the teams are unsuccessful, is because the coach isn't doing something, or, you know, maybe we haven't got a very good coach in place. But actually, I think it's much more an understanding that, it takes teams time to develop, and sometimes they will make mistakes, and things will happen. People will leave, people will join, and that's part of the journey of the team. But I think it's important for the coach to have those conversations with the organisation about what do you expect from me in this, and what do I need from you. So that it's a really transparent model. Everybody's really clear about what they're doing, how they're working, and what's expected from them.
Tanya, can you just, if I may, explore that a little bit further? We have experienced differences in organizations using someone from outside the organization as a coach in their Buurtzorg pioneer teams.
Yeah.
And we've also seen organizations appointing their own coaches. Is there a strong preference for one or the other, in your view?
It's difficult, isn't it? I'm an external coach. But I think, you know, I think one of the tensions perhaps, Paul, is that often organisations, when they're setting up their pioneer teams, you know, they have project managers in place, or people are very close to the project. And I guess one of the pressures might be just a time pressure in terms of we need someone in the coaching role, and here you're familiar with the model, kind of let's slot you into place. I think there is a lot more to that coaching role than just having someone with a label of coach on their forehead. And I think indeed to be a coach plus project manager or coach plus heat shield puts you in a very difficult position in terms of some of those clarities of roles that we've talked about. And I can imagine that for some people who have been internal coaches wearing different hats, that's a challenge. I'm sure it can be done, but I think it's tricky, particularly when we're taking an organisation from a command and control kind of hierarchical setup to trying a new way. I think, you know, hopefully in a few years' time when we've got organisations where they've got many teams on board and the culture of the organisation is very different, then I'm sure internal coaches will be able to thrive and develop in that milieu. I just think at the moment when everything else is trying to change and the Buurtzorg model is still quite new and fresh, I think that's a fairly big ask of people.
Okay, that's very helpful.
Yeah.
You referred earlier when you were talking about the Dutch coaching setup that there were quite a few elements in place in the Netherlands that helped coaches become, or help people become coaches and help coaches stay great coaches.
Yeah.
What is vital in that sense, and what can coaches expect here in the UK?
Yeah, I think it can be quite a lonely role, really, Paul. You know, I think if you think about the Dutch coaches, they might be in touch with 40 teams, but they're often, you know, working from home or kind of travelling around the country, visiting their various different teams. So as I mentioned, in Holland, they have quite a strong support network. We're now developing the same sort of support network in the UK, both through our Buurtzorg community. So the people who are setting up pioneer projects and part of our client group can access the Buurtzorg community, and there we have a kind of a coach section, both for coaches to be able to speak to other coaches, but perhaps for team members to speak to other coaches, so that people feel supported and networked together across the country. So I think that's really important. We're going to be having our first coach gathering, hopefully in October, so an opportunity for coaches to meet other coaches and to have conversations about how they're finding the role, the things they've found useful, the things they've found helpful. So again, we can learn from each other in the UK context and strengthen our role. And because it is so new here, we've worked quite hard in Buurtzorg Britain and Ireland to develop a coaching job description and kind of person spec, and really think about, well, what is the training and development that would be required to take people on the journey to becoming a coach, and that's a training program we've also developing. So I think I'd say a bit watch this space, but it's really exciting times because we have now got various coaches working in different organisations, developing this role and developing this practice.
Thank you. That leads us, I believe, to our final slide, because that sounds all very exciting, if I may say so myself. Let me just move on to the next slide. You talk about challenges arising, so all is not necessarily rosy. So what is perhaps still an area where more work is required?
Yeah, I mean, there are things that I think I've touched upon. I think, you know, the Buurtzorg model is a big shift for organisations to engage in. And I think one of the big shifts culturally is moving from that kind of command and control and, I suppose, risk management model to really moving to a model which is much more based on trust. And the trust of frontline staff, to a trust of their professionalism, a trust that they will do their best to provide the best care for their clients. And I think when we're having self-managing teams and coaches working with self-managing teams, that requires a certain level of trust as well, because the organisations have to let go of having that sense of control and knowing what's going on all the time. So I think that is a challenge, and you know, you've got a predominant culture that is very prevalent and has a huge history, and this is countercultural. So everybody, well, I would say kind of everybody actually needs a certain amount of coaching and support. So actually, it's not just the self-managing teams perhaps that need a coach to help them to develop their own new ways of working, but maybe it is also about the leadership and kind of the wider organisation and how they need to develop their new ways of working too. And that's something I think we're learning about and developing our support offer on as we go forward with different pioneering teams and watching different organisations across the country learn about Buurtzorg and adapt and adopt the Buurtzorg model. I guess one of the things sometimes that happens, Paul, is that, you know, self-managing, and they go, oh, great, we've got a self-managing team, they can do everything. Pile on all the issues. And I think one of my challenges in the role of a coach is sometimes supporting the team to really push back on that because their self-management and self-managing doesn't mean they do everything. It means that they do the things that they have the capacity and capability to deliver the care to that person in the centre of the onion model. But if it's a complicated HR issue, you know, they've recruited a new person and they've identified them, great. They've identified them. Let someone in the back office, and we haven't really spoken about that, but I think Brendan's talked about that in previous webinars, you know, let the support team around the self-managing team deal with that information, and let's not have nurses trying to fill in complicated HR procedures for the first time. You know, there are people who have got the skill set for that. I guess it brings up issues, doesn't it, for the organisation? We are creating new structures, new ways of working, and within that then there's, you know, all those policies and procedures that is the norm or was the norm that are having to be revised. So one that springs to mind is, well, what's the new supervision model going to be? What's our new appraisal process going to be? In Holland, they do intervision, so that the team members are kind of responsible for supervising each other and having those kind of supervisory conversations. And here, because of our regulations and, you know, depending on whether you're working in health or local authorities, you know, there are certain statutory requirements, and how are we going to manage that in this self-management model are questions that have to be addressed. So yeah, I think it raises lots of questions. I don't think they're insurmountable, but it's certainly you need to be engaged with the issue. Having a self-managing team and a coach is not enough. It kind of, the ripples ripple out across the organisation, and they need addressing and picking up as we go along.
Yes, I guess in that sense it's very much an important element of the model, but an element, and we're talking about a whole process, a whole journey of organizational development and repurposing that is at stake here to do this well.
Yeah, and I suppose, I'm sorry, Paul, to cut across you, but I guess there's just one other thing, and I'm aware of the time. I think one of the things that we have seen is, sometimes these pioneer projects or teams kind of have a life cycle. Perhaps the organisations will say, well, we've got funding for a year or 18 months or 2 years. And I guess one of the things I've really noticed is that it takes time. Teams don't become self-managing overnight. They learn to become self-managing, and that in itself is a journey. And they need that time to develop their team, to develop their team ways, to make mistakes, to learn from them, to really engage in those kind of learning cycles. And I think, again, that is one of the challenges arising when perhaps you've got these slightly more short-term-ist approaches to trying to develop such a radical new way of working.
Well, that's certainly an important message to some of the leaders listening in today to our conversation.
Indeed.
Thank you, Tanya. That was a great overview. I hope that we've answered a lot of the questions that are out there, but perhaps there are more. So, Alec, maybe it's best if I give the control back to you so that you can make sure that we answer any questions that are with our audience.
Thank you, Paul, and thank you very much, Tanya, for the excellent presentation. So, guys, we have a wealth of experience and a wealth of knowledge with Tanya and Paul on the line. While I steal back control from Paul, who's been presenting and flicking through the slides, I'll just open up the lines, and if you could unmute your phones for the next minute or so, just please jump in and ask your questions. I do have some questions in the chat box if you're very, very shy, but please jump in and ask questions while we've got the opportunity. It sounds like everybody is very, very shy. Can you still hear me, Paul?
Well, we can.
Hello, I can ask a question. It's Chris Bruce speaking. I've been working as part of the support team through Healthcare Improvement Scotland. There was lots of really interesting and helpful stuff there. Thanks, Tanya and Paul. I'd be interested to hear how enthusiastically teams in England and Wales are embracing the solution-driven method of interaction, way of working in the team. And you talked about the benefits of the coach promoting that.
I think on the whole, I think they've found it really helpful because it's giving them a structure for their team meetings. I would say primarily, Chris, in terms of kind of that's the first place to kind of go, okay, this is SDMI, so the solution-driven method, as a structure. I would encourage teams to try it in their team meetings first and to get familiar with it, and then once they've kind of got the hang of it a little bit, to kind of make it their own if they feel it's not quite working for them. I think it's got a depth to it that I hadn't appreciated at the beginning in terms of also then being used as a kind of a methodology and almost a thought process for communication. Perhaps for those difficult conversations, but also for conversations with clients. I mean, it's a very basic model in many regards. It starts with the kind of the goal, what's the question, what do you want to address, and then takes you through a series of questions and kind of 3 or 4 steps. So I suppose I've come from a perspective of really trying to get the teams to engage with it and have that almost as a fundamental part of the framework for the moment, until perhaps we know more about really what the kind of really helps self-managing teams. But it's been so helpful in Holland that I suppose I'm a bit loath to say, well, why should we do it in any other way? And I guess like learning anything, I think some people and some teams have found it a bit clunky at the beginning. But, some teams have written it up on their wall and they've got big posters, or they've put it as Post-its on their laptops, or whatever it is that they've done to try and kind of encourage their own learning. And I think actually most teams now really use it and appreciate it, and has changed the way that they particularly do their meetings in a constructive way.
Yeah.
Does that help?
Yeah, I'm struck by how little it's been taken up in Scotland.
Right.
And I think it is useful, but I got a strong sense when visiting Buurtzorg that as you say, it was a fundamental way of communicating with each other.
Yeah.
So in a sense, your suggestion that it's a kind of easy approach in Buurtzorg in the Netherlands didn't quite ring true to me. And I think that fundamental way of thinking through things together seemed to be quite a unifying consistency. Yeah. So, yeah, it's helpful to hear that, and I pick up from you that not everybody's bought into it straight away, and you might have done some work to support people to keep considering it.
Yeah. Absolutely, Chris. I think one of the things, well, probably as with any of us in kind of learning and development, you know, a one session for half a day at some point isn't enough. Yeah. And, you know, and I guess that is partly the role of the coach then to reinforce, support, encourage, reflect, engage with the learning of a new way of doing something, to support that change, really. So I think, one of my learnings has been that, you know, half a session is not enough. You've got to keep going back and keep going over it and keep working with the teams on it in a way that they feel comfortable and then kind of go, yeah, we got this. Yeah. And then if later down the line they decide, actually, you know, we want to change it, fine. But let's start off there. Let's get them self-managing well.
So let me just push you a bit on that. I suppose it's a sense of intentional coaching, if you like, where there's certain assumptions. The framework obviously is the main one, but that method as well is another one. So do you think if a team doesn't work in that way and work together in that way, as long as they're meeting their annual outputs appropriately, that's deemed as okay in Buurtzorg?
I think that's a really interesting question. I think probably in Holland it would be plus or minus. I suppose as a coach here I'd be curious maybe to go in and ask whether I can observe a team meeting, just to kind of get a sense of, okay, that's fine if they don't want to use that methodology, as long as they're not then slipping into problem-orientated agendas or, you know, team meetings where actually it's very clear that they're not really operating in consensus or making conscious choices. So I guess it's not about using it or not using it, it's just about observing and seeing what's on the ground, I think, really.
Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah. It's an interesting question.
Thank you, Chris. Thank you, Tanya. That is 4:15, and we do have one other question. Are you still able to stay on to answer?
Yeah, I'm fine too.
And I'll try and summarise this. It's two questions rolled into one kind of thing. It follows on to Chris's question too, which makes me mindful of it, that there does seem to be a very much a focus or an assurance that the solution-focused method of interaction is perhaps a critical element of the Buurtzorg coach style. And if that is the case, is it the fact that is there challenges of using that style in the UK when we have perhaps historical line management structures and the management role in organisations, for example, like the NHS is so historical, that must be quite challenging, and where does it work well, and how do we approach that? So it's two parts to it really. Are we more or less able to bend the system in the UK because of maybe the established structures that we have, and is one of the challenges and barriers this managerial role, because I take it you mentioned earlier that the coach isn't necessarily a managerial role, and is quite different. So is that in itself a challenge too when this extra role comes into play?
Let me take perhaps the second one first, if I may, Alec, because yeah. So my sense is that the coach role is another role. It's separate and different from a managerial role, and I think I would be really, I'd kind of give a big health warning to any organisation that wanted to develop a Buurtzorg way of working, where they wanted to try and somehow combine the role or kind of slightly fudge the issue. The coach in the Buurtzorg model has no managerial responsibility, so they don't have to deliver in the way that a manager may feel that they have to deliver. So I think it comes back to that thing about locus of control and responsibility. The team is responsible. The team makes decisions. The team makes their team agenda. The team decides what they need to talk about. The coach is there as another set of ears and eyes and kind of expertise if they ask for some advice, because coaches can give advice, but they're not there to hold the reins. And I think that's that is a fundamental difference between that management hat, even if they're, they might do some great coaching, to having a self-managing team working with a coach as support.
So I suppose the second element is the team, again, hypothetically in charge of their own destiny, making
Absolutely.
decisions, and then perhaps getting blocked by this historical management line structure. I take it that does happen in your experience with other teams as well, and how is it best to approach that when that becomes a challenge?
Yeah, so I'm not sure whether Brendan, and perhaps I haven't mentioned it much today, but there's the heat shield role that I think is really important as well, that would kind of fit between that layer 3 and 4. So that the heat shield role is really that other person that might be that defense barrier, to the demands and expectations of the old ways of the organisation, and would be kind of protective. And I guess on the slides, the reason I've used those chutes is because as a self-managing team, I think you are a neophyte, and you do need to be protected, and you do need to kind of be nurtured to be enabled to be self-managing. Because if you come, you're a little tiny plantling and someone comes in with their great big boots and squashes you, well, in self-managing team kind of metaphor, that would be enough to take your confidence away in terms of saying, oh yes, we do have the authority to make these decisions, if actually they don't really. So that heat shield role, I think, is really important in terms of creating some space between the old ways of the organisation and the new ways that the team is developing things. And I think that the heat shield and coach often have to work fairly close hand in glove to keep that kind of protective layer around the team.
Perfect answer and a perfect place to end. I really like how you brought in reference the previous WebExes in this series of 6 as well, because at each point, whether it's framework, whether it's the onion model, whether it is the heat shield, or whether it's the coach, I get the sense that each and every element, there's not one part of the model or the principles is more important than the other. It's important to have all together. So a lovely place to end it there and really summarise the series of 6. So it just leaves me to say thank you very much, and thanks to the participants, but thank you very much to Paul and Tanya too. These WebEx will of course be or are recorded, and they'll only be available on the Knowledge Hub website, which we have set up for the Neighbourhood Care Programme at Healthcare Improvement Scotland. So if you would like to have access to the recordings, please email us at hcis.livingwell@nhs.net. But sorry for overrunning 5 minutes, but thank you very much to all your time. And thank you very much again, Paul and Tanya. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you. Thank you, everybody.
Bye for now.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.